Hello everyone, Mr. John here from Areteem Institute with this week's Thursday Tidbit talking a little bit about the mathematics behind white elephant gift exchanges. Inspiration is of course these gift exchanges. Holidays are approaching, many people are participating in these white elephant gift exchanges. We'll talk about some specifics later, but remember, the typical framework is everyone brings a gift and you determine some random order of picking the gifts or taking turns going through things. And the situation then is people either pick a gift, meaning that they grab a new present out of that pile, or this steal. This steal is really the thing that makes things a little bit more interesting and a little more complicated, and we will think about and explore how that adds some complication here a little bit. That is the rough idea. We'll talk about some specific rules when we get into our questions. But let's do a warm-up first, and this warm-up shows why the steal is important for making this a more interesting setup. Let's just say 8 people are participating. This means that we have 8 people and therefore 8 gifts as well. So that is our setup here. We have 8 people, 8 gifts. And we will talk about how the journeys could be happening. And so by the journey, I mean person 1 picks something, but then it's stolen from him, and then that person steals something, blah, blah, blah. At the end, when the dust settles, notice that this is the same thing as, in a sense, ignoring the fact that steals exist. At the end, every person ends up with 1 present. And then you could pretty easily say, well, P1 could end up with 8 different gifts. P2 could end up with 7 different gifts. And this pattern is going to continue. When we get to P7, there's only 2 gifts left if we're choosing them or just labeling them out directly like this. And we have our 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And product rule, all of these things are happening sequentially. We multiply to get our answer. And reminder, this is just 8 factorial. Our final answer, ignoring how these gifts are given out, just how many different arrangements or possibilities of people with gifts are there by the end, the answer is just 8 factorial. As I mentioned, things get a little bit more complicated in what I'm calling this journey when we start thinking about the steals and things like that as well. Before we get into that, we better talk a little bit about some more specific rules that we can look at. And just for our video today and the questions for next time, 8 people with 8 gifts. That's the assumption that we're going to be making. Of course, this would change, but the main ideas are similar regardless of the numbers. First person starts by picking a gift, right? If you're going first, you just pick a gift. The rest can either do that pick or steal. And of course, if they steal, then that new person doesn't have a gift, so then they immediately pick or steal. This is where things start to get complicated there. And so just explaining that a little bit, anytime we have a steal, this turns into another set of, well, does that person whose gift was stolen, do they do another pick or do they do another steal? This is the complication. This is where things get interesting, if you like, as well. Now, without additional rules, you should start to ask the question, well, what happens if things just keep getting stolen? Can we have infinite loops or things like that? Well, yes. And that's why we typically have some other rules added. One, each gift can be stolen at most 2 times. This number could vary there. Sometimes people say only 1 steal. I think it's a little bit more interesting if things can be stolen twice, and you'll be able to explore that in some of the problems and questions a little bit today. And with these stolen twice, gifts cannot be stolen back immediately. What I mean by this is if person 1 steals person's 2's gift, right? P2 cannot immediately, and I'm going to keep stressing this word, but not really tell you why. You should be able to think about that more for later. They cannot immediately steal from P1. This would make things, especially because it can be stolen at most 2 times, a little bit boring. If I have a gift I like, if you steal it, then I just steal it back and we're done. And then it's your turn. The gift is now locked with me, so we have that not possible. Again, immediately stolen back. It's not saying if P1 steals P2's gift, that doesn't mean P2 can never steal from P1, but they just can't do it right away. At that specific turn, they either have to pick a new gift or steal somebody else's gift there. So let's start explaining this with an example. And I want to show here why things in general are pretty messy. You could think about total scenarios as a challenge question or maybe a programming question. We're going to stick to what I'm calling journeys in some of the questions because overall things can be complicated. Let's try to make a chart. So we have people, P1, P2, up to P8, gifts, A, B, C, right, up to 8 total gifts. We're just going to worry about a small example and start explaining why some things could get complicated there. So, suppose we start out P1 picks gift D. We could label this in a chart, and so at any given time, I want you to think about a horizontal row here telling you who currently has what gifts. To be economical with our rows, if we have a second thing, so person 1 picks the gift D, it's person 2's turn, they don't want to steal, they pick a different gift, say they picked gift C, so we have this there. So we could then be highlighting, okay, this information happens, and we're keeping track of that in this row here. Spoilers, why might we start getting into other rows from here? Well, we have to start worrying about what happens with steals. So suppose we get to P3, and P3 steals present D. What this means then is that that present is taken away from P1. So now P3 has present D, and P1 now has no present. Now it's their turn again. So for example, P1 could pick B. And then I'm going to leave this as a second row. And you'll see why again in a moment, spoilers, but we could keep track of that all here. We now have a second set of, after this steal and some picks, what happens there. And it's pretty easy to see that we probably need this new row anytime that there's a steal. Well, what happens if we have another steal then in the next one? So P4, maybe they steal person 2's gift. So they steal C. Well, what if that person then steals something? So they steal D in this case. Now, it's not going to be relevant here because we're going to stop our example, but I want to put a star by this because this is the second time D was stolen. So in fact, we would know here that D is actually locked. We would, even if we're not going to fill in these rows, P2 now has gift D forever. That one is locked, and you would never have to deal with that again. Here's where those at most 2 times steals come into play. Well, then from here, we could say maybe P3 picks gift A. So they picked gift A. Notice we have not touched pick or present B here. So then at this point, we could fill in that row, assuming that we didn't have more steals or stuff coming up, but that would be a setup then here. So we could start keeping track of these rows, and hopefully it's clear that things are pretty complicated. We have stealing going on. Stuff can only be stolen twice. So once it's stolen twice, we have to be a little bit careful of what's going on and things like that there. Now, what I want to talk about in the problems, we're going to talk about 2 types of setups, 2 types of journeys I'm going to mention in the problems there. So one journey is looking at a present. So suppose we were looking at present D for the moment. We could say, well, present D was with P1, right? Then present D got stolen and was taken to P3. And then present D was stolen again and ended up with P2. Now it was locked with P2, and so that was the end of the journey there. So in a sense, if we were talking about present D, so let me maybe put this off to the side here. Present D1 from person 1 to person 3 and then to person 2. This is what I mean by a journey or something there. If we think about, for example, person 2, we could also do a highlighting of a specific person there. So suppose we had person 2, we could say, well, person 2, this person started with present C, and then they ended up with present D. C was stolen, and they took over D from there. There's more we could keep track of when this happened, things like that there. But let's just think about these specific things in that scenario. So that is our 2 questions actually here. So consider one single gift. Does it matter which gift it is? No, we just saw an example of D, right? Say gift A, right? And it ends up with a single person. How many different journeys could it have? Just to hopefully make this clear, what are some examples of this? Well, maybe we have a simple example. Gift A is chosen by P1, and then that's it. Nobody else steals it, and so A went to P1, and that's done. Or maybe A went to P8. Remember, we're still considering 8 people here, and then that is done. Or maybe A went to P7, and then it was stolen by P8. Now, these things are a little bit more complicated than you think. So we want to think of these journeys and the steals. Remember, however, that the picks are happening in order. Maybe that matters, maybe that doesn't matter. You want to think about that and worry about that a little bit when we're thinking about these things. But these would be 3 sample journeys of a bunch. So how many different journeys? How could we generate these? What would they look like? Etc. That is talking about a specific gift. We could do the same thing with a person. So we already talked about this, but just as another example or set of examples that we could look at here. For example, maybe P1 picks present C. and no one steals it, and that's done. Maybe they pick present F, and nobody steals it, and they're done. Maybe they pick present A, and then that's stolen, and they pick present C. Maybe that's stolen, and then they pick present B, and then it's done. So these are the journeys. I started with present A, somebody stole it, then I got C, and then I got B, and that was the one I ended with. Again, let's not worry about when these things happen. I don't care about I had A for 3 rounds, and then C for 2 rounds, and then I ended up with B for the rest of the white elephant exchange. We don't need to worry about those specifics here. Just focus on which presents we have. In a way, it's kind of saying, at any given time, what present could I went home with? For a while, I thought I got present A. Then I thought, okay, I got present C. Then I got present B. And then that was the one I actually had then. Okay, think about those. As I mentioned, you can, of course, think about extensions as a challenge, but we'll talk more about these questions, specifically the ones we mentioned there, next week. If you have other ideas for videos or topics for upcoming weeks, please share them below in the comments, or share your ideas for these questions for answers or clarifications. Always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Otherwise, I will see everyone next week. Goodbye.